Oh, you are? I do declare. I do declare. We're back on the air now, so we're ready for these questions. In case you were waiting for the little feeling, what did Dr. Jarrett call that big black eye? So let's question these gentlemen while they're here. Do you still perform? Are you still a coroner?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. I didn't even know, I wasn't even thinking about marriages and weddings. What other things do you do that we might not be thinking of?
You mean officially?
Yeah. Oh my.
Well, as Stan said, of course, we have responsibilities for the recorders. This is becoming more a larger job all the time. This year we're about, we've already done, have had more recordings this year than we had all last year. We're now on the microfilm system and have been since 1972, which is a great help to everyone in recordings. Coroner, marriages, not divorces, thank goodness. I'm also master for the Superior Court and whatever they assign to me, which could be just about anything. Criminal, civil, that's about it.
Do your duties take you out of Kenai now?
Yes, they do. I go to Seward probably 2, 3, 4 times a year. Next week I'm going to Anchorage and teach in a seminar. I'm going to Kotzebue in December and teach a seminar. And that's about all. I'll go to Homer sometimes. So.
Have you had anything to do, or do you have information, either one of you for that matter, about, I don't even know if I'm about to ask a sensible question. I saw a film on Bush justice and how the courts are set up and so on. Do you have anything to do with that particularly? Are you directly involved in sending or in having organized anything to organize Bush justice? Just settle for that.
Not really. I've never attended a Bush Justice conference, although I'm going to Kotzebue to teach a seminar on Bush Justice in December. Don't ask me why. I suppose I'm going. I suppose because I'm president of the Alaska State Association of Magistrates. Is what I'm doing.
I have a question. What has the state done with the records that your office, the magistrate's office, ones have generated, and how accessible are they to researchers? Let's say territorial magistrates' records, and then the judicial records that at your level have been generated since statehood. Where do you send your records?
We keep them.
You keep them?
We keep them in file, right? And all of the filings and recordings are now on microfilm. However, we do have some old criminal books that date back to, geez, way back. I remember one of them used to be ADL, and I never could figure out what ADL was. And someone said, oh, that's Alaska dry laws back in Prohibition time. So I know that some of the records date back to then. And there's some of the marriage books that date back to 1915 or 1916. And another interesting thing, Stan, I don't know if you remember or not, but some of the records you turned over to me, one of the old commissioners, when he left, had hid them under his porch. And they got wet, and they're still sort of stuck together and beat up.
How accessible are they to researchers? I imagine there would be many interesting cases to
accessible.
good
All you have to do
stories.
is come in and look, and yes, there are some good
Are
ones.
there restrictions on those records?
Only in your juvenile cases. All others are available, or they were, I guess they still are, to anyone. And people do come in and look up old deeds or old records quite often. In fact, most every day, I imagine, has something there, don't you, Jess?
Right. The old U.S. Commissioner's records, the old criminal docket sheets are all handwritten and in a bound book. So they're still...
There's some fantastic stories for
There
all
are.
of you who are interested in writing them up, I think. They're
Well,
right,
once in a
right in
while-
this town.
Every once in a while, we go back and look through them and read them and get enjoyment out of them.
Well, that's a very obvious source, I think, that some of you should avail yourselves of and take a look and see what interesting stories you can write up. I think there's a restriction on the mentally ill, for instance. That's true.
Come forth and help people die, but I've often wondered, since those early days when Jean suggested that you apply for this, I know you've had a lot of further training, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us what kinds of things and institutions that you go to these days.
Oh, let's see, I've been to the National College of State Judiciary in Reno. I've been there twice to various seminars, and the American College of Judiciary, which at one time was in Alabama, is now located at the University of Colorado. Plus numerous seminars in Anchorage and around the state of Alaska, conferences. No, it hasn't.
One thing I might mention, Mary, that I didn't bring out, I guess you've been talking about homesteads earlier a little bit.
Not enough.
When I first came to Kenai, there wasn't anybody on their own land, really, or practically nobody. They were all on government land. The government, Mrs. Munson can tell a little more about that, and many others here, but they hadn't been platted yet. I mean, they claimed it as their own, but it hadn't been properly platted and accepted by the government yet. And there was always plenty of land that no one particularly wanted, so no one saw any use to gain more. And of course, there were no federal taxes, no federal income, except income tax, that is, no state taxes except income. But then no one had the income anyway, so it didn't make any difference on that one. There were no city or borough taxes. Of course, there was no city or borough at that time. There were no subdivision regulations, no wastewater regulations. In fact, that Mrs. Castleberry's water tasted a little bit like Clorox. Whenever Mrs. Cooley did the washing across the street, didn't really bother anybody either. Even the first sawmill here was started out in the woods. They just picked a place and started a sawmill without applying for the land or permit to cut the timber or anything else. So there were reasons in those days that people didn't bother to homestead because there was no value to the land. That's kind of what I was trying to bring out.
That is a good point. But weren't there some repercussions? Did this not lend itself to a few problems after oil and a few things like that?
Certainly did. A lot of people had built a cabin out in the woods, for instance, that they'd almost forgotten about and suddenly remembered it.
Betty.
Dr. Sherwood was asking, or made mention of flying over and not seeing too much cleared land. I think one of the reasons why many homesteaders gave up on clearing any more land than their prove-up land and growing any crops, I won't say it was deliberate, but I might not say it, but I know what I think, that many wholesalers and food brokers who were making considerable profit off of food shipments into Alaska did what they could to discourage any crop growth. I know of one potato grower who took his crops into the military in Anchorage because there were a couple of misshapen potatoes and a couple of bags turned down the whole shipment, which was his total livelihood and all the blood, sweat, and tears along with his wife running a cat. And so he, in desperation, sold them at a very cheap price to a broker who the next day took them very happily out to the military and sold them for a considerable profit on the blood, sweat, and tears of one of our homesteaders from Ridgeway. And I don't believe there has ever been a concerted effort or any attempt by the state of Alaska to do anything to cause any homesteaders to grow any crops. It's only in the last year or so that any people have made any money of any kind off of any crops that they've managed to grow. When we planted oats on our prove-up land, we had one fellow, Walt Bremen, who had a homestead in California, and he had some cattle, who came out out and bought some. And I think we made $15, the total off of the oaks. It cost us $1,500 or something like that by the time we planted it, which was part of the cost of getting your homestead patent. But I don't think, I know in our case, back in the days when we were younger and really felt gung-ho that maybe we could do something, and I'd get wild ideas and talk to the extension agent about, gee, why don't we plant sugar? The ships are coming up full and going back empty. If we could just grow something that we could sell to somebody. And nobody ever, the extension place in Palmer, I wrote them letters. They never even answered me, let alone cared whether anybody ever developed anything. We just never, I don't know, Jess, did you ever grow anything on your homestead? John, did you understand? Ever grow any kind of commercial crop? I don't think that homesteaders could ever grow anything commercially that you could make a buck off of. If you spent a couple $1,000 and maybe you got $1, we were real lucky. So this is one of the reasons why there's no food production in the state of Alaska. And you won't get any until the people who own the land have some kind of a system whereby if they should grow crops, they could sell them and at least pay for their labor and their materials, their costs. There's been nothing done along this line on an individual basis for homesteaders.
I disagree with that.
Yeah, the problem is producing a unique crop for which there is a market in Alaska or outside. Have the farmers on the Kenai tried to organize any cooperative marketing arrangements or to organize a co-op to market their crops?
Homer.
You do have a co-op in Homer.
They had some kind of a co-op. In fact, they had a place at one time, they had a co-op where they had a lime deposit had a magnesium for fertilizing your garden. But it went kerplunk because the way it was set up, individuals couldn't buy it unless they went down with a pickup truck and had it dumped loose in a bed of their truck and hauled it home. There was no way to bag it or anything like that. But it was a superior product, actually, as far as the quality of it was concerned.
Maybe the distance from the market has something to do with it, but it seems to me that, and this is not my idea, I read it someplace, that it seems to me that even Matanuska, the climax, because of the economy and the climate and the soil, the climax kind of agriculture in Alaska seems to be dairy farming and poultry, that normal cropping just won't work here for economic reasons allied with the climate. But don't feel bad about your oats. I produced about 30 tons of peaches and I get a half a cent a pound for them. The co-op is just a couple blocks down the street where they're sold.
The question of agriculture has concerned me. I lived for a number of years in the Matanuska Valley on a dairy farm, and I have been interested a little bit in the history of agriculture. And it seems to me that the federal government for many years maintained experiment stations in, of all places, Rampart on the Yukon and at Copper Center, and of course in the Matanuska Valley, and so on and so forth. It seems to me that not only the federal government, but the state government as well has tried to do whatever it felt it was required and put quite a bit of money, really, and effort into agriculture. The problem, from my perspective at least, seems to have been the lack of a market. So far, at least, and this is still true today, it seems to me, it has been cheaper to ship eggs or milk or vegetables, whatever, from Seattle to Alaskan markets and sell them below what farmers in Alaska can produce them for. I know the farm I worked on finally went out of the business when it became cheaper to bring milk, airborne milk from Seattle than what could be produced on the farm in the valley. And I can understand consumer reluctance, for instance. Why buy a dozen eggs for $1.15, which are grown at Big Delta, or laid at Big Delta rather, by Hardy Hens, if you can buy the same dozen come from Washington hens when you can buy them for 89 cents a pound. consumers are not about the government will, the federal government and the state government will subsidize agriculture. The consumer is not willing to do so. And I think one more note on homesteading. I don't know that much about homesteading on the Kenai Peninsula. I know that in Palma very often the people who have stayed on, very few have made it. They have eventually now, there's quite a bit of money has been made in subdividing land which people have acquired. I know this is certainly true in the Fairbanks area where homesteading never should have been allowed. It was a very marginal enterprise to begin with, and the people who did homestead did so with the intention of turning a fast buck if and when population increased and these lands could be subdivided. There are all kinds of derelict homesteads you can see on the way from Anchorage, driving the old highway from Anchorage to Fairbanks. And this is what has happened. The people have turned the homesteads into subdivisions and have made money. But it was only at a period of time before the railroad was built that agriculture was viable in Alaska. Certainly in the interior, Fairbanks or the Tanana Valley had a great many farms which supplied horse fodder, for instance, and vegetables and various other foodstuffs. But it was, they were successful because there was no other supplies from the outside were very difficult to get in, and they were very expensive, and farmers could compete. But once adequate transportation network was established, farming fell on evil times and has been on evil times ever since. It seems, as a matter of fact, that I, as a taxpayer, very often have subsidized homesteaders who have moved out ahead of the state which has built roads. Homesteads have sprung up right and left of the road, closed off the public domain which lies beyond it, and then immediately we were called upon, we meaning the taxpayer, to supply school bus service and paved roads and rural school post delivery and so on. So from my perspective at least, homesteading presents a rather dismal picture in this state. And personally, I'm very glad that it was finally terminated.
Just one figure to bolster that. I did a very crude bit of counting recently, and for I think it's an 8 or 9 year period in recent Alaskan history, the U.S. Department of Agriculture gave to the 400 farmers in Alaska something like indirectly, not directly. This represents research and other things, but it's nevertheless still a subsidy. Provided a subsidy to Alaskan agriculture that averaged out to about $19,000 per farm, and that the total USDA expenses the total USDA appropriation for Alaskan agriculture, exclusive of the Forest Service, was actually, I think, $2 million more than the value of the product, something like that. Very interesting.
Can I say something on this?
Yes, please do.
I have to disagree violently.
Good. Very good.
I really feel that homesteading, just because it wasn't as successful as a farm, doesn't mean that homesteading wasn't successful, although the original act was designed in the Midwest for farming. There's a lot of people have gotten a great deal of pleasure, perhaps as much as is possible, out of having their homestead, of proving up, of fighting the elements. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme type of thing for most people. It was a lot of hard work, but in a lot of rough years, and it meant something to them. It was a home. It was a piece of land they could call their own. Maybe they could just raise enough vegetables for themselves, or maybe not even that. But it was a place that they could go. They were rugged individualists, most of them. They didn't want to live in a city or in a crowded town area. And the fact that some of them later on subdivided as population pressures increased, I think is good, because otherwise that land wouldn't have gotten to the people. Subdivision is a good process. It's one that does get the land away from the government and into the people's use. It then becomes land that taxes are paid on. Instead of laying there tax-free, it helps support rather than causing the added expenses that previously mentioned. No, I think
I just have to disagree. I think homesteading was wonderful. I don't know of anything that meant more to Alaskan people than homesteading, and I'm very sorry that it has stopped.
Obviously, the sentiment is on my colleague's side, so whatever I say would be rather fruitless, but I don't want to give up that easily, and I think the original intent of the Homestead Act of 1862 was, of course, to bring land into agricultural production, and this, the homesteading in Alaska, as I explained previously, has been a violation of that intent. I mean, it may be fun and hard work and prove satisfactory to the hardy individualists to go out there and battle the elements, but still the fact remains that it has resulted in a very haphazard land development pattern, that it has not followed the original intent of the Act. And I know, for instance, that in Fairbanks in the last few years, the only lands that were still available were north of the Yukon River, where no agriculture was feasible, and yet some hardy souls went out. They destroyed the 160 acres and gave up and returned to civilization. So from my perspective, at least, I think it's a good thing that the government finally has done away. And I think that the transfer of land into private ownership would have occurred without the aid of homesteaders. But I grant you the point that it may have been a very satisfactory experience for many people who were involved in this particular enterprise.
Give us a figure on how much state and federal land has been turned over into private ownership in the last 10 years in Alaska? The state of Alaska owns all the land that they have received the patents on, and as far as I know, they have not put any of that land in private ownership. The state owns it. And our borough has a lot of state lands in it. I know we probably are going to have to subdivide and sell some of our homestead, and one of the only reasons we would consider doing so, in spite of the fact we're nearly reaching retirement age, is because we're not going to be able to afford the real estate taxes on it, because we live in a very high value area in North Kenai. But the people that I know that want to buy land and want to own land, they have no alternative but to buy from people like us, for instance, that will have to probably dispose of some of our land, because the state owns the land and they can't get it.
This problem of private land ownership, I think each borough in Alaska under the Statehood Act was entitled to select certain areas surrounding the borough for settlement purposes. I know that the Fairbanks North Star Borough has held land auctions from time to time, and if I remember correctly, it were the local developers who were most vehemently opposed to the government getting into the land business because they wanted to dispose of their homesteads first. I think a very good example of this is Joe Vogler, who was the independent candidate for the governor recently. He has a large homestead in Fairbanks, and he has been very vehement in his criticism of the borough, which has land and has held auctions from time to time. He says that the borough has been in competition with private enterprise. Now, as far as the state is concerned, I'm not so sure that the state should turn private or public lands over to private ownership. Most of you probably remember the Open to Entry program, which was initiated a few years ago, and after operating for approximately 2 years was suddenly suspended, and I don't believe it will be initiated again. Again, from my perspective, what happened was that you had a very random pattern of land ownership. People claimed 5-acre tracts on the edge of McKinley Park, built little shacks. The same thing was, well, along the Chattanooga River, the same thing was true. A very disruptive and uneconomical use of the public domain, it seems to me at least. And as I said, the state suspended this program, and I don't think it will be put into operation again. I do believe, however, that the state should make efforts to classify those lands which are truly suitable for agriculture and sell those lands at reasonable prices to people who are really and truly interested in putting these lands into production, rather than, as with so much of the homesteading, which has turned out to be a speculator's dream in many instances. No.
Just an ownership of home and homesteaders. It's a problem with the people everywhere you go. In the towns where they have subdivisions in Kenai, one of our gentlemen was just elected senator and made a considerable profit off of Redoubt View subdivision in the city of Kenai, and I haven't heard anybody say anything recently about the amount of profits made from subdividing land in the city limits there. So if a homesteader makes a profit, that isn't bad, because people that subdivide anywhere making a living is part of being in America.
Yeah,
So you pay taxes.
I didn't mean to imply that it was disloyal to make money. Far be it from, I'm not that subversive. I just suggested that it wasn't the most useful way in utilizing land resources. And I think, as I stated before, and I maintain this, that the intent of the 1862 Homestead Act was to put land into agricultural production. And I simply say that this has never been the case in Alaska. And I grant, your case, that it is probably an enjoyable experience to be out there mucking on the homestead. But it still is in violation of the spirit of that act of 1862.
I had truly wanted to create a stir on this. I thought I was going to have to do it myself, and I knew I was going to have to go way up there 25 miles south of Mount McKinley and pick on a bunch of gold claims to bring my point. It doesn't matter whether you get rich. It's a way of life, See, the hawks teach their young to fly and all that kind of thing. Sentiment clause. But this is good. I'm so glad that we had no brickbats or anything like that, but I do think that this has been a good thing and something that a lot of you people wanted. What about talking about private ownership and etc.? Bob and John, what can you offer? You have been for a long time involved in some public ownership, some federal lands that have been designated for this and the other, and I'm wondering, maybe everybody doesn't understand what all has been going on out there that is perhaps of benefit to so many of us, and I know the program has been, expanded and expanded. Gentlemen, between you, why don't you give us some notions about what's been going on out there on the Moose Range, etc.
Well, as you know, oil was discovered on the Moose Range in the Swanson River area. I believe it was July 21, 1957. Since then, of course, it's changed the status of the Kenai Peninsula area, Cook Inlet area, etc., as we've heard previously yesterday and this morning on the controversy between the federal and state governments over Lower Cook Inlet. Well, with the coming of the oil, or discovery of the oil, I should say, prior to this time, little interest had been made towards leasing of lands. And with this discovery, the total Moose Range practically was immediately leased. The Bureau of Land Management, who had the responsibility to issuing leases for oil, contacted the Secretary of Interior for clarification, as no administrative regulations covered leasing of lands on federal reserve areas. Once the Department of Interior was contacted, the then Secretary of Interior, I believe it was Seaton, closed the total area to leasing until a classification of lands closed to oil and gas leasing was made by the Bureau of Sport, Fisheries, and Wildlife, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the Bureau of Land Management. This followed through in 58. I believe it was about August when the final determination was made, and approximately half the moose range, then consisting of 2 million acres, was closed. And this included the Tustamina area, lake area, the Andy Simons natural area, which again has been proposed for wilderness status, and up to the Kenai River, Skilac Lake, South Shore boundary. Now I'll take a correction on that. It extended to the new Sterling Highway. Of course, with this classification, numerous court actions were immediately instigated with those individuals who had leased lands within the so-called closed area. They claimed the Secretary of Interior did not have the authority to do this. And the judicial processes followed, which eventually was resolved for the moose. Certain court actions followed later, one by the state of Alaska, claiming Tustamina Lake area as lands owned by the state, which again went through a series of court actions, was finally resolved by the Court of Appeals, and the case was refused by the Supreme Court, which again turned the bottom of Lake Tustamina back to the moose. Since then, of course, there has been various exploration developments. The Swanson River area, an area approximately 12 miles in a north and south direction and 4 miles east and west, has been developed into a substantial oil field which has produced during the years 59, 60 through the present time at the rate of approximately 30,000 barrels a day. Shortly after the Swanson River came into production, the Cook Inlet opened up, and we've seen what has resulted. Money has gone into the state treasury, the general fund, in royalties. 90% of the royalties, the land leases, etc., accruing from the moose range go into the general fund of the state of Alaska, which have amounted to in the past between $2 and $3 million per year, and possibly more with the increase in price of oil. And of course, within the moose range has developed an area which is very industrialized. It's virtually a biological desert as far as moose are concerned, providing winter range. You see an occasional moose within this oil field, primarily because hunting has been prohibited. The animal is protected there more. Outside of the 2,500 miles to 3,000 miles of seismic trail which crisscross the Moose Range, I don't think anything further needs to be said.
Thank you, John. Do you have anything to add to that, Bob?
Well, something should be said about the native land claims in regard to the Moose Range. The native land claims, of course, is quite confusing to most of us, so I'll only talk about it in regard to the Moose Range, and even there, it'll probably be confusing. Three areas were claimed by the natives as villages: Kasilof, Salinatoff, and Point Possession. We felt that these areas did not qualify as villages under the Alaska Native Land Claim Settlement Act. We protested. Hearings were conducted. The ad hoc board has decided that these were, in fact, not villages. Kenai itself, the village, was included in the law as a special case along with Kodiak, Sitka, and Juneau. Kenai qualifies for one township of land. They can select, as we understand, within 50 miles of the center of the town of Kenai. Probably most of their land selection, most of their township will come from the Moose Range. At the present time, there's a court case. The Cook Inlet Region Incorporated is suing the Secretary of the Interior for additional lands to select from in what they call deficiency lands. And this is in the court right at the present time.
Thank you. Can I say that we are not offering a variety of subject material today, and this, I believe, is what you want. Vera, do you have anything to add to this discussion today?
I really don't. I have a dream that I sit in on and listen to a seminar for the history of Kenai, and I'm enjoying it thoroughly. It's very informative and interesting. I'm enjoying it very much.
Good. And thank you for keeping me company. Mary.
What you want me to do?
I wouldn't even try to tell you, because anything that you would open your mouth and decide to offer to us would be worth hearing.
I've been listening so hard that I lost track. Well, I'll say something. We used to have Alaska bone dry law here. And, you know, that kind of law brings moonshiners. So we had moonshiners here in Casilla and maybe other places around the inlet. Well, I don't know if I should talk about this. Well, anyway, the dry squat people, they traveled on a boat, gas boats. They came from Saldovia to Casilla, from maybe Kenai, and they made their rounds around the inlet. Well, they arrested one man down around Casilla, and they were taking him to Kenai on a boat. We had a jail here then. This man that they arrested, he was thinking real fast. So before they got to Kenai, he kicked that steel, dumped it overboard.
That's all I can say.
Oh, Mary, you're priceless. Gentlemen, we have Phil. I know you can add something here, and John, you'd be thinking. Or you'd be thinking of something.
Is this one alive? We've had quite a few old police stories here this afternoon. I think maybe I better tell two more. It won't take long. One I can vouch for. The other I hasten to add that I cannot. The first one I'll tell happened to me. The second one, like I say, I hasten to add, was not me. The first one involves a time when I was in the highway patrol in the Copper River Valley. This was in the early 50s, 51 or 2, somewhere in there. And one of my local spies phoned me on the old community phone system and said that there were two fellows bringing a dead buffalo down from Big Delta after having killed it in the vicinity of Donnelly Dome along the old Richardson Highway. So I ambushed them, and they had no identity, no identification. They claimed to be predator control agents for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They tried to make me believe that Fish and Wildlife agents would go out without any identity at all, either on their Jeep truck or on their person, but believe me, they had neither. So I took them down to Copper Center and installed them in the local jail. And they said, well, at least phone the office and tell them what's happened here. Then you'll get the straight of it, and you'll have to let us out of here. So I said, all right, I'll phone it. So because Big Delta was in Fairbanks District, I called Fairbanks. A man named Clarence Wolford was the enforcement agent for the Fish and Wildlife Service up there at that time. And I asked him what to do with him, with these two men, and he said throw the blanks in jail. And I said, I have already done that. He says, now throw the key away. So I went back and told these two fellows in the bucket that I'd been told to throw the key away, and they didn't like that much. Then they wanted me to call Anchorage and call a man named Jack O'Connor, who was really the man I should have called in the first place, which I did, and he verified their story completely, and I had to let them out of jail. Now, to give you an idea of just how dangerous it was to be any kind of a policeman, a highway patrolman, or a territorial policeman, or a deputy marshal, how dangerous and hazardous it was to be in those days, I tell you that one of those two men I had in jail was Jay Hammond. The next few days are crucial to me. The second story, I really can't vouch for it. I choose to believe it. I think it's gospel truth. In the territorial days prior to World War II, the territory of Alaska was divided into 4 judicial districts, and each judicial district had a district court headquarters. The 3rd judicial district had its headquarters in Valdez. There was a district judge stationed there. He had his court there, and he had several deputy marshals there to attend the court. He had a case involving, I don't remember what the case was, I have heard at one time, but he had to go to, send to Cordova and have a native girl brought back to Valdez as a witness. So he sent a deputy marshal on a weekly boat to Cordova, a run of some 6 or 7 hours. And there was only a weekly schedule on the boats. So the marshal was gone, deputy marshal was gone for about a week. He finally brought the girl in on the next boat, and they got her on the witness chair, and the judge asked her, "Did the marshal subpoena you?" And she dropped her eyes and said yes. And the judge asked her, where? Twice in Cordova and once on the boat. I never did hear how the case came out. But these two stories give you some idea of just how hazardous and how highly adventurous it was to be any kind of a law enforcement officer in those days. I think that's all I have.
The boat was the Esteban, Phil.
This is your last chance. I haven't made any comment. This is your last chance for a question to John and his rather different duties that he has down the road. John, comment.
Yeah, I would like to answer any questions that you might have about the development at Nikolaev's or in the Anchor Point area. I have a little story that doesn't top that one, so I might not even tell it, but if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to.
There isn't any that is, you plan to keep them, they're going to be given permission to stay on Lynn Village, this is right, for their school.
As far as the school is concerned, I in answering your question, Mary, you know, if it was up to me, I could give my opinion, but unfortunately we have a borough assembly and a school board, and then there's the people, and the school board and the borough assembly don't always see eye to eye. I think the school board has come out strongly in favor of establishing a permanent school in the area, and I would recommend that because I'm looking at 97 students up there next year, and I also see development in the subdivision from you know, other people that might be in the area. I think a lot of people are misinformed. For example, a young woman came to me this year, and she wanted to enroll her students in Anchor Point. And I said, well, where do you live? She said, well, right next to the village of Nikolaev's. I said, well, why don't you enroll there? She said, well, I thought that was a parochial school. She said, isn't it just a private parochial school? And I said, no, we have teachers paid by the state. They're public school teachers. The curriculum there is the same. And you can send your child to school there. They're going to get the same curriculum as at Anchor Point. And I asked her to go up and talk to the teachers and see for herself, and she did that, and subsequently enrolled her children in the village school, and was quite satisfied. A story that I'd like to relate was the first time that I went to the village as a principal. I didn't have it scheduled or anything. I just stopped in to see how the teacher was doing, and it just happened that that particular day the men in the village were having a meeting, and I saw a number of the men walking down to this house just from the schoolhouse, and they were all gathering for one of their men's meeting, and I went to the school and talked to the teacher and observed the students, and pretty soon the men showed up at the door of at the school, and they asked if they could come in. And this was the classroom we were using for the upper grade students. And they explained that they wanted to get to the bottom of a particular problem that had been brought to their attention. And the teacher filled me in that he had some school supplies in his desk, about 6 boxes of pencils, a dozen pencils in each box, and some of these had been missing. And he just had mentioned this to the custodian, that perhaps some students had been in there after school and took some pencils. Custodian at that time was the religious leader in the village, and he thought it was a serious problem. All of the men in the village then had gathered to find out what had happened to the stolen pencils, and as they, all the fathers of these children in school came in, and they circled the room about, each father looking at his sons and daughters in the classroom with, you know, you could see the fear going over the students, because there's their dad, and he was not very happy as they, you know, looked over them. And they asked if they could, question the students and things. And so they explained that it wasn't so much the amount of the items that were stolen, the value amount. It's just the idea that stealing was involved, and this was something that they were very really wanted to not let go on anymore. They really wanted to do something about it. And so they sat down and questioned students in Russian, and then every once in a while one of the younger men would come back to us, and he would act as a spokesman and fill the teacher and myself in on what was going on in the questioning. And finally, one of the older men in the village turned to me and in very, well, in fact, he didn't even speak English. He spoke in Russian, and the younger man interpreted, and he said that he was wondering if it'd be all right if they had a public flogging, if they found the guilty person, and they took him out and maybe made some type of example. And so we had a little discussion on the way that we usually handle it in this country, and I suggested that perhaps the parents can discipline their children in their own way at home, and if a child was not physically abused or something like this in the home, that the law would protect them. But I tried to form a little bit different philosophy, but it showed me one thing right there. There's a different philosophy. One of the young fellows said that when he was in school, it was in China, and he said that he thought the teachers were supposed to be very stern, very strict, and that your discipline had to be, that the child had to be afraid of the teacher and have this fear, and therefore would be respectful and would learn. But I think the schools up there are really doing a good job now. We come from one teacher about 3 years ago. Well, no, we had 2 teachers 3 years ago, and now we're at 4 teachers. And I think the village people are really making an attempt to become a part of our society without changing their lifestyle. For example, there's 30-some people that have asked to have classes in citizenship for adults, and this is something that I believe we're finally going to get underway in January, having adult classes in English and civics and this type of thing to help them towards their citizenship. That's probably all.
Any other of you? Do you have a question?
How do people feel about visitors?
We're usually quite open. I think they're shy because of the language barrier. The older people, I'd say from 50 on, don't speak English, but the younger people in 20s and 30s and the children speak English quite well, and they're pretty open. They're a little bashful. If you go up, sometimes they're kind of shy away, but they are very friendly and warm. Yes. Now, the only thing I'd say on that is that Saturdays seems to be their work day, and that's the day that everybody is doing their washing and getting their houses cleaned and everything for Sunday, and that's kind of a very poor day to go up because they've got 10 or 12 children in each household, and they've all got to take their baths or banyas on that day and do their washing, so that's kind of a poor day. But after church on Sundays, then that's kind of a social day and on their holidays and so on.
Peggy? I've been looking to you here. I was just thinking here, while you're having this done, Claus isn't here right now, I think, but anyway, Enid and her husband, they just raised foxes on their homestead.
We now have 186 signatures to our guest book. I would say that the conference on the Kenai Area History was a success. We appreciate very much your coming, your cooperating, and being with us. Thank you very much. Mary?
I don't know how many people are enrolled for credit, but I have about 6 little bunches of notes, and does that mean I offer 6 single